I mean, of course, we've got all sorts of promises from various different political personalities all the way through. But should we kick off this morning with the migration argument? Because it does seem as though Yvette Cooper has kind of set a few hairs running. She appeared on Laura Kunsberg yesterday on the BBC Morning Show. Let's have a look at what she had to say.
A normal level would be around 200,000. So is that what you mean? Is that the kind of number?
Well, again, and I understand the question, and I know that you're effectively trying to suggest I set a target or a broad target. I'm not going to do that. We are going to be clear. Net migration must come down. We believe it's really important, and what Keir has set out is commitments that we will bring net migration down.
They will bring net migration down. The Tories promised to bring net migration down, and they didn't quite manage it. And, of course, Yvette Cooper didn't want to give a number as to how far down it was going to go or when.
Well, I think she's realised that the trouble that the Tories have got themselves into by making these clear promises. You'll remember in 2010 and 15 it was to get it down to the tens of thousands, then it was just to lower it, and they've, of course, been held to account for all of that, and I think Labour wants to avoid doing that. But of course it was Labour that started all of this. We must never forget it. Although it's been far worse under the Tories, mass migration started with the new Labour revolution of Tony Blair in 1997. And of course what we hear about is that they want to reduce net migration. People should be talking about gross migration.
Yes.
Because, you know, net migration...
Because gross migration is 1.2 million a year,
That's 1.2 million. So although there's been a slight decline in net migration, which is only about 685,000 last year compared to over 700,000 the year before, gross migration really hasn't changed. All that's changed is that fewer people have left than have arrived.
Yes.
But that isn't actually getting to a handle on immigration. And actually, it has to be said, you know, one of the reasons Tony Blair wanted mass migration was because it ideologically suited the Labour Party.
Yes.
Because ethnic minorities vote 80% for the Labour Party. And the two great assets that the Labour Party have are the youth and ethnic minorities.
Yes.
And those two demographics do not vote Tories, so it actually has always been in the Labour Party's to its advantage to have immigration.
And also, even in the papers today, we're still reading pieces written by people saying why we need migration in order to run Britain. And it's never, to me, been a particularly satisfying argument, because it's one thing to say you need immigration to run Britain, but it's another one to say an awful lot of people coming in, as you've seen from figures, and you've told me before from figures from the Office for National Statistics, a lot of people who are coming in here are not actually working.
No, they're not working at all. Well, we know over 70% of Somalis, for example, are now living in subsidised housing, in council housing.
Right.
Look, the whole idea, this model that we were sold for 20 years, that migration boosts the economy, we've got a stagnant economy. We've tried it, it doesn't work.
Right.
You know, that's the definition of insanity, is to keep doing the same thing
It
over
works
and
if you
over
bring
again.
somebody in who then works and who pays tax, but it doesn't work if you bring somebody in who brings 5 other people with him who don't work and who then become a strain on the country, whether it be the NHS or schools or housing or whatever it is.
Well, we know that EU migration and migration from India does boost the economy, but migration generally from elsewhere is a drain on the economy, and it's about time we said that. Now, migration also increases the GDP, and so from a very superficial reading of the GDP, you could say, oh, it's a benefit. But GDP per capita, most importantly, is declining. So the more people that come here, the poorer we've actually all become, despite that. And there is a link,
well, it's a sort of levelling down, if you like, isn't it?
It's absolutely levelling down, and there's a link to our productivity crisis here too. And this is why why have the Tories been in favour of immigration? Well, you know, obviously it works to their disadvantage, given that new immigrants don't vote for the Tory party. It's because they don't have the interests of the British party, of the British people at hand. They have the interests of big business at hand, and it's in big businesses' interest to have cheap labour coming over. We've had no investment in capital infrastructure, you know, machines that can pick apples in the orchards and so forth, because people have relied on cheap labour, and now we're paying the price for all of that.
And big business, as I say, does not always have the interests of Britain at heart. And one thing is to say, if you want to bring people in to do specific jobs, that's fine, but you don't bring just hordes and hordes of people in who don't have jobs and who will never have jobs. And we've got Trevor Kavanagh's column in The Sun today. Read my lips, Labour leader Keir Starmer told The Sun on Sunday as he vowed to slash the tidal wave of immigration, or mass immigration. But back in 2020, is what Keir Starmer said: if I'm elected as Labour leader, I will start work immediately on plans for radical change in the immigration system. No more hostile environment, no more demonising of migrants, but a system based on dignity and compassion. Well, that doesn't sound like a slashing of the tidal wave of mass migration to me.
Yes, well, you know, who knows where Sir Keir stands on any of this. Churchill, he always seems to say whatever's going to get him into power.
Yes.
He'll say that when he wants to become leader of the Labour Party.
Right.
Now he wants to become leader of the nation. He says something else. Churchill once said, it's very hard for a nation to look up to somebody who always has their ear to the ground.
Yes.
And I think Keir Starmer is the poster child for all of that. But, you have to remember, Peter Mandelson admitted to the fact that the Labour Party sent out search parties looking for people to come to this country.
Yeah.
So Labour has a track record here, and I think we should be quite wary about this sudden change of heart and this sudden claim to be fighting for what the most British people want, when we know that he doesn't have a track record for doing any of that. And he's also saying, that he wants to get migration down by banning bosses from hiring foreign workers and increasing training for British workers. One of the reasons illegal migrants come to this country is because it's far easier for them to disappear into the black economy than it is in France. The French are very good at cracking down on employers who employ people in curry houses and these places, and also landlords who don't do checks. We don't do that here. That's one of the reasons why Britain is such a draw.
It's very much so, absolutely right. We'll be talking to both Trevor Kavanagh and Dan Hodges, and talking of Keir Starmer pleasing the nation, he's not even pleasing the Labour Party at the moment, is he? Because Dianne Abbott and that big row that blew up last week came to a kind of a denouement, if you like, when on Friday, sort of late afternoon, suddenly Keir Starmer crumbled and said, of course Dianne Abbott can stand if she wants to. And now she's saying she's going to.
Talk about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, because we understand that there was a private silent deal done with Dianne Abbott to restore the whip, and she would then retire gracefully with dignity. Instead of that, they went and briefed that they had managed that she wouldn't be standing and everything else, and it was that briefing that essentially caused her to dig her heels in and now declare that she would actually stand for election. Now, up to this point, I actually don't think this has been so bad for Keir Starmer, because going to war with the far left of your own party works better for him in terms of securing undecided voters.
But only if it works.
Only if it works.
Right.
On the pure mathematics, losing the Owen Joneses of this world isn't that big a deal when you're winning so much more of Middle England. But undeniably...
And what's worse is that Angela Rayner appears to have stepped in and sorted it for Dianne Abbott. And I think the Tories actually put a poster out with a picture of with a picture of Angela Rayner looking at her phone saying, "Don't worry, I'll sort it." And it looks now as if he's weaker than ever.
Oh, it does. But, this is one of the things, though. The last week has been terrible for the Labour Party in terms of the Dianne Abbott gate, if I can call it that. And the Tories at the same time have put out a slew of radical policies. And yet the Labour Party's polling has increased.
They're still up.
So if this is how things are panning out during this election campaign, I think really there's not much hope for the Tories.
Well, the Tories have got another one on the front pages. We'll talk about it coming up next, because it's all about sex and biology. Apparently, Kemi Badenoch is going to be saying it's all about how you're born and who you're born to and what you are when you're born. It's nothing to do with how you identify. We'll come up with all of that. It's all over the front pages with myself and Rafe. Next. Listen, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo is here. Sex is a fact of biology, it says on the front page of the Daily Mail. I mean, it's taken them a long time to get to this point, but they've sort of slowly dragged themselves to it, haven't they?
Yeah, this actually makes me angry. This is one of the times I've become angry during this election campaign, because now we have as a manifesto promise that they're going to actually deal with the Equality Act or change part of it. Well, Rishi Sunak was promising to do stuff with the Equality Act before he became Prime Minister.
Yes.
And what I find a complete betrayal of the British people is the Tory party giving up on 8 months more of government when they could easily have done this. They had 8 months left. And it seems to me that they're doing damage limitation by calling this election early to save a few of their friends' seats in Parliament. That was the logic behind it.
Right.
Meanwhile, they're leaving the rest of the Tory voters out to dry, because so much decent Conservative legislation, like actually abolishing the Equality Act, could have been put forward over the next 8 months, because it's inevitable that the Labour Party is going to win.
Right.
The Conservatives know that. So rather than just trying to save a few seats, they should have put the interests of the British people first and enact decent, proper legislation and try as much as they can to hamstring the Labour Party.
But isn't that part of the problem with long recess they have over summer, though? Because, even if they hadn't called an election for July the 4th, which obviously they did relatively surprisingly just 2 weeks ago, there wouldn't be much much time for parliamentary business between now and, say, September anyway.
Oh,
and then,
sure.
And then they come back from a long summer holiday, and I know that MPs will say, oh, yeah, but we're not just on holiday, we do constituency work, I get that. But nevertheless, they come back, and then they take another month off to go and do Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, whatever party conferences.
But repealing a legislation is much easier than creating new legislation, because we have to go through the new legislation.
Yeah.
But this would simply be a simple
Well,
statement.
I mean, they could have spent the time that they spent on
it.
the smoking bill, for example, doing something interesting, or they could have spent the time on something other than the Rwanda bill, going backwards and forwards between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, getting nowhere.
But the Rwanda bill would have gone somewhere had it not been for things like the Human Rights Acts and things, you know. And so it's these pieces of legislation that have hamstrung the Tory party and have prevented it from actually getting ahead with its agenda.
Yes.
It's been the NGOs, it's been the lawyers, it's been the courts, you know, tying up the governments because of these acts brought in by Labour.
Yeah.
And I don't understand, you know, Gordon Brown brought in the Equality Act in order to entrench the Labour Party's progressive equity type of ideology, and since then it's always used by academics, by NGOs, and by HR departments. Oh, we have to go by the Equality Act, even though they don't know what's in the Equality Act.
But it's used by the people who want to change things over the diversity and inclusion policies in various companies as well. Let's talk about a couple of other stories. D-Day coming up this week, the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Lots going on in Portsmouth and other parts of the world, but we're seeing a couple of stories today. One, that recruitment is at an all-time low for all of the armed forces, and similarly also there's a call to use Spitfires in the D-Day commemorations, which at the moment they're going to be banned from doing because of that crash the other day.
That's right. I mean, it would really be a huge shame if Spitfires weren't actually taking part in this. You know, we're so used to now, whenever there's a big royal event, a ceremonial event, you have the Battle of Britain memorial flight, and everyone waits to see two things. The Lancaster bombers, there are only two Lancasters in the world, one in Canada, one here that are still flyworthy, but then the Spitfires, and the crowd always erupts.
Which makes a fantastic noise, doesn't it?
It's absolutely brilliant, you know, and there are only 60 Spitfires left in working order, and one of the chaps who works on these planes has said, if you don't keep them flying, they will cease to work.
Yes.
So they need to be up and about and seeing things, so I really do.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it, that it's probably the Health and Safety Brigade who are saying, oh no, we can't use any Spitfires, which were used during a war, which it was quite dangerous as well to fly a Spitfire because it might get shot down.
And the other thing, of course, is, you're quite right, there's a big recruitment crisis. I think 25, a quarter or 28% of the Special Forces recruitment has declined. And people are
some of the levels are down by 50%. I mean, it's quite a crisis for them because, you know, we had the national service conversation the other week about whether, you know, people should be forced to go and do some military service. But also when we had a sort of a poll on it, a lot of young people said, well, I'm not interested in fighting for my country, thanks. Don't want to.
This is a huge problem we have here, of course, because we have the most left-wing youth in history.
Yeah.
But, of course, because of this, the army are talking about lowering standards.
Yes, it's very tricky,
including accepting people with asthma and so forth. Now, call me old-fashioned. I don't want an asthmatic going up trying to storming the beaches.
And these are the same people, of course, who told us years ago, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that, you know, future battlegrounds will no longer be, you know, physical. They will just be cyber battlegrounds, and so we don't really need people to be physically fit because you can sit behind a computer and fight anyone. Well, look what's happened now. Now they're all going, oops, it looks as though actually proper real-life battles are the thing, and we don't have enough people to fight them.
Yeah, the lack of foresight here has been amazing to behold. But, you know, it's not rocket science. If you want to increase recruitment, stop targeting women and ethnic minorities where we know that very few of them are actually interested, and stop demonising white working class men who are actually the main demographic who are attracted to the army. And once you actually try to, you know, because right now there's no incentive for them to fight for a nation when they think the nation doesn't appreciate them.
No.
In fact, if anything, derides them and accuses them of white privilege and systemic racism. So it's quite simple. Just get back to old-fashioned, you know, your country needs you.
Common sense.
Decent adverts showing what a good life you can have in the army. Because, you know, I've got a friend of mine who was a very poor guy in America, in Carolina, got a scholarship, went to university, went to the military academy, is now a colonel in the Air Force. For many people, the army has been a great way for them to advance their lives and their careers. And we know that white working class boys are the most disadvantaged group in society, and the army is an excellent way for many of them to actually improve their lot in life.
It absolutely is. Speaking of which, Britons have become side hustle specialists, according to the Times. Piece in the Times that says as many as 47% of people across the nation are actually admitting to having some kind of second income, with a further 10% actively searching for one. So an awful lot of people who are working from home are doing it because they can run a business as well.
Does that include appearing on radio shows?
I think it does, actually. I think you could.
This is a side hustle.
If this is a side hustle for you, well done. I mean, for me, it's all I've got, you know. But I think it's true. More and more people are sort of finding ways of reselling things that they bought before, or upcycling things, and then finding actually there's a bit lucrative money. But Airbnb is another thing that people are doing, making an absolute fortune.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad situation we're in now, where people. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but I think it's a sad situation. People need to do that and feel compelled to do it because they aren't getting the income streams that their parents' generation did.
Or maybe they're paying more tax than they used to.
Well, and rents are far higher. You know, trying to save for a deposit on your house. I mean, the thing is, life is a lot more expensive now than it ever was before. But it does show how ingenious people are, and young people are making something on average. Those who do this are making about £600 a month. So it is something which is quite a good something to get into, especially if you're a student and you've got student debt as well to deal with.
Absolutely. Now, this will probably wind you up as well. Campbell College in East Belfast is one of the places in the country, that's in Northern Ireland, of course, where you can do skateboarding as a GCSE. Which I suppose, if you're that sort of age and you are skateboarding, these kind of things used to annoy me, but actually it doesn't annoy me as much as it used to.
What's the examination? Is there a written exam for skateboarding?
I think it is. I think there was nothing too challenging. There was practical sets as well as theoretical sets. I suppose it's a bit like driving. And nothing too challenging, says one person who's studying the course at the age of 14. Ollies, shove-its and dropping. An ollie apparently is a jump caused by the striking of the tail of the board into the ground. A shove-it is a 180-degree jump without the tail hitting the ground, and dropping is entering the ramp from the top.
I'm sorry, but
I actually know a bit about this because one of my kids is a big skateboarder.
We have a skills crisis in this country, and you do not solve a skills crisis by having skateboarding lessons as a GCSE offering. You know? I just did a lecture recently on how to reform the education system, and I was saying, we need to make history teaching compulsory till the age of 16, because in Europe they have it till 16. We have, at the age of 14 you can drop it, and people don't know anything about the history of their country. There are so many decent things that need to be done to improve the education levels of our children, but skateboarding, I fear, isn't one of them.
Skateboarding may not be one of them. Rafe, good to see you. Thank you very much
so much
indeed.